I have to excuse myself. I can only address you in English. As you heard, my name is Gunnar Winkenwerder. I'm a German citizen, so my Polish is very limited. But I understood my name, HP Enterprise Security, and Texas. So it sounds that it addresses me. I think I'm the last speaker before your lunch break. So yeah, I hope it's not going to be too boring for you. I will take you on a journey about application security, how we help our customers to basically address application security where it arises in the first place. I like to compare it on a very high level, similar to if you have a headache. If you have a headache once, what are you going to do? Usually you take aspirin once, fine, your headache is gone. But if you have it on a regular basis, it might make sense to go to see the doctor, identify the problem and fix the problem, why you always do have a headache. And this is a little bit about application security. It's not about trying to protect from something, it's rather identifying the root cause of the problem and trying to fix it, so that a bad thing, a bad exploit cannot happen in the first place. Because the drivers are pretty obvious. No organization wants to end up in the press like this. And there have been some very prominent ones, like Sony media PlayStations. I'm very sure pretty much everybody in the world have heard about it, where more than 100 million customer data have been stolen, including credit card information, PIN numbers, and so on. So the direct penalties and charges and cost to Sony, I think, have been added up to 180 million US dollars. But this was just a small part, because on the other hand, the stock price, the market capitalization of Sony reduced by 50%, which added up to close to 4 billion US dollars. So a huge damage to this organization. And this was just one, and you read it every other day. I'm not sure if you read this morning's news, what's up. I think everybody who uses a smartphone has heard about WhatsApp for communication. This has been hijacked by Palestinians this morning. They captured the service. So it sounds like they not want to steal or espionage. They rather want they're activists. They just want to show, hey, we have problems with the Israelis. But of course, the motivation behind this in a lot of cases today is not just to show we can, like the scripting kids, we can break into an application, we're better than you are. It's espionage, sabotage, or any kind of other damage that might occur. Here we go. Here I summarized some recent figures, all from 2012, 2013, what analysts state about the motivation and the drivers for application security. If you look at those numbers, independent if it's Gartner Group, NIST, or as a conference, everybody states that today 80 to 90% of successful breaches happen on application layer. Why is it? Companies spend 90% of their security investments, which adds up to millions of dollars across the globe, on security each and every year. And still those breaches happen. And this is because companies are doing quite well on the perimeter defense. Hardware, network, the whole infrastructure is quite well protected in these organizations. But the attackers, they shift towards attacking the applications directly. Front-end, external-facing applications. A good hacker usually takes 10 minutes, 20 minutes to identify a vulnerability in an application. And then they can take it from there. And once they're in the application, this is where the goodies of a company are. Customer data, business processes, financial data, trade secrets, contracts, design studies, research, data, whatever. And this is what the bad guys usually are looking for, especially in terms of stealing data, data theft, or espionage for research data, for example, design data. And for the bad guys, usually it's sufficient if they find one exploitable vulnerability. Therefore, the challenge for the good guys, the security folks in an organization, is really they need to protect everything. HP ran a research study end of 2012 with some quite interesting findings that are underlining also the statements you have seen from the analysts on the slide before. This is basically, if you look at the, starting from the left hand, the three graphs, the costs are dramatically increasing or have been increased over the last 3 years for organizations to deal with cybercrime. The number of successful breaches has doubled from 50 to 102, I think, in 2012, and the trend is ongoing. So the hackers are shifting their attack patterns away from the infrastructure level towards trying to identify vulnerabilities right in the application itself. And the time to resolve a cyber attack is also continuously increasing. And this is simply influenced because the frequency and the intensity and the sophistication of these breaches is continuously increasing. Mr. Kaspersky from Kaspersky Labs made an interesting comparison a couple of weeks ago or months ago. He compared Stuxnet. Probably most of you heard about the Stuxnet breach 2.5, 3 years ago, which he compared, or where he stated that had the complexity of a car, like an automobile, but today Red October has already the complexity of a space station, like ISS. So this trend is continuously ongoing. And this is basically the motivation for organizations to deal with it. And one question that Fortify asked itself when it was founded in 2000, when does it make sense to address application security? When an application is already in production or already when it's developed? And if you look at the graph, which is already from the mid-90s, but it clearly states that 80 to 90% of the vulnerabilities are introduced when an application is developed during coding phase, because developers have never been trained to produce secure code. So they produce code each and every day, but this code is only trimmed to be in time, in budget, and hopefully in quality, but nobody spends any thought on security. So they produce vulnerabilities each and every day. And this is exactly what we are looking at in terms of our approach, which is basically an overview, what we see as a mature, or the components of a mature software security assurance program. It starts very early with automated static assessment, helping the developers on a daily basis to review their work, identify vulnerabilities in their code, provide them guidance on how to fix it. And if they can take care of 80 to 90% of those vulnerabilities, in terms, if you look at web applications, automated dynamic assessments, penetration tests can be reduced probably by 80 to 90%, but they are still valid because there's probably somewhere 10, 15% of vulnerabilities that come only into context when an application is compiled and ready to put into production. And the third component is what we call real-time or runtime assessment or runtime protection, allowing to provide logging information of an application in production, for example, to a SIEM, a security information and event management platform like HP Arcsite, and allowing to help protect on an interim basis against identified vulnerabilities that are identified in an application that is already in production, because it needs to go back to the developers. On the lower left-hand side, you see the key for an organization. It's not just to identify vulnerabilities. They need to do something about it. They need to fix it. Otherwise, they're still vulnerable. So they need to go back in their code, fix the identified issues, and then put the fixed application back into production. And of course, for the auditors, the security folks, ongoing continuous reporting and training. Heart of every security solution, of course, is the most up-to-date security vulnerability database. So we have at HP Enterprise Security about 1,500 researchers looking for zero-day exploits, for the intrusion prevention systems, and in new, as of today, unknown vulnerabilities that can be exploited in programming languages. Sometimes if you're not a programmer yourself and never seen really a line of code, it might seem abstract, but this is a great technology and helps organizations really to get rid of those vulnerabilities in the first place. Of course, how are organizations using those technologies in terms of automated, static, and dynamic assessments? Organizations work very differently. Some do everything in-house, like banks. They usually run, as you see on the right-hand side, on-premise solutions. They scan, they provide their development teams with those technologies to work on a daily basis. Others have outsourced most of their development. They use on-demand services, where they just, on a regular basis, for example, after every new release, do a security assessment on their applications to verify that what the partner or the developing organization has contributed is according to set security criteria. Just to give you a bit insight, vulnerabilities in code is, as I said, sometimes, if you're not a developer, quite abstract. But as of today, we are able to identify 563 categories of vulnerabilities across 21 supported programming languages, which are listed here on the right-hand side. So we are looking, of course, at every new language that is picking up in the market and has the potential to gain the acceptance of the development teams across the globe. We'll probably not look back to Assembler or Pascal or Fortran languages like this because they are going to die eventually. So all the web-oriented languages, they are in the target because they are the most vulnerable ones, of course. If you're interested, in the link on the table on the lower left-hand side, there's a link which describes in detail each and every of those vulnerability categories to the corresponding programming languages. From an operational point of view, static code analysis is not just about pattern matching. It's not like Microsoft Spell Checker, who looks and tries to compare. What Fortify Static Code Analyzer does is really translating the languages into what we call a neutral format and then run a full analysis to understand the logic of the program, because a lot of vulnerabilities become only into context in terms of the logic of the program. Where is data coming in? How is data flowing through the application? And where data is leaving the application again? Where are passwords coming from? Or are they stored eventually within the application? Things like that. There's two reasons why we do that. First of all, to add a new programming language. Of course, we only need to create a new translator. That makes it a lot easier on our end than to develop the 22nd or 23rd time the whole global analysis. The second reason, which is by far more important from our point of view, if you look at modern web applications, they're usually not just a Java code base. There is some .NET, C# code whatsoever in their ASP. So you can easily have 4, 5, 6 different programming languages in one application. And by translating the whole stack, we still keep the whole logic of the application rather than ripping it apart and then analyzing it. So once the translation is done, we have 7 analyzers in place. So we look for the control flow, the data flow, the structure, the semantics of the application, just to name some. And then we map it against the vulnerability database. And the outcome is a report. And from there, it can be accessed for auditing purposes. It can go back to the developers that they can really work on the issues and get them fixed. And we understand, as we work with developing organizations each and every day, that needs to be a very smooth process without major interruption. Because if you tell an organization you will be doing 9 months only bug fixing, we would be that nobody would be able to do it, because everything needs to be in time, in budget. So the process is pretty easy. Scan is done automatically. The result is stored, 3-step process, translated, global analysis, and then mapping against the vulnerability database. The result is stored in what we call the Software Security Center server, and from there it's taken over by a role, what we call a project security lead, who has a first look at the vulnerabilities found and identify, and he decides what to do. Is it critical, high risk to be exploited, puts it to the bug tracking system, and from there it goes back to the development teams, gets assigned to the developers, please fix it. And organizations do it on an iterative basis, each and every day. Most larger organizations have overnight builds, so they scan each and every day the code produced, and in the morning, an average developer has 1 to 2 vulnerabilities to fix. And over time, of course, the amount of vulnerabilities critical and exploitable in an application will go down dramatically. Of course, the security people, the auditors, they monitor the trend to be able to make a decision, is an application ready to go into production without any major risk? A little bit about customers. Fortify was the first available commercial static tool for code analysis. The early adopters, as you can imagine, has been banking and finance. So 10 out of 10 leading banks worldwide use Fortify static and dynamic analyzers for their application security. At the beginning, they were like probably 65, 70% of the overall market, banking and finance. This is down now less than 20% because there's much more market segments jumping on this, like all the large software OEMs. They started to use these technologies as well, and the process is going with it, like Microsoft, M.Sc, Oracle, HP software. Of course, we ensure the security of our applications as well. Apple. So everybody uses those technologies. In the healthcare market, we see at the moment huge momentum in the telco and energy market, online trading, for example, online billing, and all these interconnected services in the telco and energy industry. Now, at the moment, the government sector is picking up because more and more countries do or have initiatives in place for e-government, e-taxes, for example. E-commerce and retail, of course. Nestle, airlines. All the security consultants, PwC, KPMG, Ernst & Young, CSC, they're all using these technologies. Followed by the automotive industry. In the last 2 years, we saw strong momentum coming from the automotive industry. General Motors, Volkswagen, BMW, Daimler, they all want to protect their research data from being stolen professionally from other countries, organizations, whoever is behind that. We don't want to blame anybody namely. This is also confirmed by Gartner Group. I'm sure everybody here in the room has heard about Gartner Group. They just confirmed in July this year that HP Fortify is a leader in application security. This is the first time when they brought dynamic and static and everything together. Just to give you a quick glimpse how it would look like in practice, because I'm not sure if any developers are in the room, but static code analysis especially is a bit abstract because you're looking at real code, not just as an application, because we're doing it during the development lifecycle. So the assessment, 3-step, translated, code base is translated. The global analysis is run, mapping against the vulnerability database. There's nothing to see, just a progress bar, because it's a closed 3-step process. And this is the first look that the project security lead will see. He gets a list of findings prioritized by critical, high, medium, and low priority. On the upper right-hand side, some details already in the corresponding folders. Usually he would spend the first look at the critical ones. He sees that there are that many SQL injections, cross-site scriptings, path manipulations, whatsoever in there. He can create own rules for his organization, add company-specific rules. He gets all the results and the insight into the application from the Fortify Global Analyzer. He sees in this flowchart, this is what Fortify has analyzed, how data are moving through the application. He has on the lower left-hand side the analyzer's trace, so he can really verify, yes, Fortify stated this is a critical and exploitable vulnerability. It needs to be fixed. To make the decision, yes, this is something we need to fix in the first place. And then he can pass it over to the bug tracking system just by pressing the button. And then it goes back to the development teams. Because quite often, it's not that we find 5 vulnerabilities. We have sometimes applications where you find 50,000. Therefore, you need this role, the project security lead, who picks the most critical ones to get them fixed first. And the medium to low priority, put them on the side for now and then make a decision later if they need to be fixed at all. The ones ending in the bug tracking system go back to the developers. They have the same view in their software integrated development environment, IDE called. he sees his code highlighted where a vulnerability has been identified, a detailed description why it is a vulnerability and how it can be exploited, because we want to make sure that the developers understand why they're supposed to do it, not just because their manager told them to do it. We want them to learn and understand why they produce this vulnerability. And of course, they get a detailed guidance in their language. This is a Java code example. So the recommendation in blue highlighted is also Java code. So he is able to see what he can do better. Then he fixes the code, checks the code back in, and hopefully in the next day scan, this vulnerability is gone, and they can close the ticket in the bug tracking system. And over time, as you can imagine, a developer who does this 2, 3, 4 times, he will never produce an SQL injection anymore because he learns how to avoid it in the first place. So he will eventually be trained to produce secure code in the first place. Last but not least, penetration testing for web application. This is a standard technology around for almost 20 years. The product behind it, HP Web Inspect, doing an automated penetration, trying to explore each and every link available in a web application, listing vulnerabilities. But as said, the development team have done a good job. Up front, 80 to 90% of the vulnerabilities should have been identified and removed already, so the efforts for penetration testing can be reduced dramatically. If somebody is interested to try it, we have a free trial, Fortify My Apps. This is for static code analysis. You can get a glimpse if you have vulnerabilities in your, this is limited to Java code only, but at least it's a trial. You can do it without engaging with anybody. I'm sure you will get this documentation. If somebody is interested, pass it on to your colleagues in the development team. They can have a look at it and get a feeling if they do have vulnerabilities in their code base as well. Because we encounter a lot of organizations, they think their developers are not producing vulnerabilities. Everybody else in the world, not their own ones, they don't. Thank you very much for your attention. Are there any questions? I will be glad to answer them if I can.
Nie ma chętnych.
Nobody wants to ask questions, I see.
What is the license schema for that suite? Is it per developer or is for the company, or what is this kind of scheme?
I'm sorry.
Step back from.
I need to step a bit over here. Okay, sorry about that. Yeah, you basically already gave the answer. There's various schemes. I mean, organizations want one assessment. They run an on-demand scan. It's per scan. Organizations developing code mainly on-premise can be an enterprise rollout to each and every developer, or starting with an auditor and a small team just having a look and having dedicated people fixing code later on. So it's a very flexible, adaptable to customer needs licensing and configuration scheme.
Okay, thank you very much.